and answer whatever you guys have. So just a quick intro for those that don't know me. Won't spend a ton of time on myself, but I'm one of the managing partners here at C5 Insight. We're a consultancy based out of Charlotte, North Carolina as our headquarters, and we focus honestly on helping people collaborate and work together. You know, we spend a lot of time on the implementation. We love the platforms. If you know anything about our organization, you know that we love SharePoint and CRM and from a tool set standpoint, but we really do focus a lot of time, like this presentation, on the upfront planning, what you guys can do to set yourself up for success. We work a lot with our clients on planning out their project, making sure they avoid these sins that we're going to go through. There's some social stuff. I'm going to encourage you guys to tweet if you are tweeting, LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever you guys want to as your social outlet there. We love interactivity and we love seeing those, and we'll retweet and all that kind of stuff as well. So there's my information, and if you want to reach out to me or connect with me, please, I encourage you to do that. So I'd already mentioned the social piece. Up in the top right corner, you'll see this little Twitter icon, and I put that on a few slides that I think are tweet-worthy, if you will. So if you see those, that's, hey, that might be something worth tweeting. I'll try to mention it, but I've kind of put that in there as a nice little thing, like, hey, this might be something I might want to tweet, a little quotable or something like that. There's my my Twitter handle and C5 Insight Twitter handle, and a couple hashtags you guys can use if you want to get social during the webinar. All right, before we jump in, I want to get Allison to pop up a poll and just get a quick vote on what platforms and collaboration tools you guys are using. My gut is you guys are here a lot for the SharePoint side, but I'd like to see just in general what you guys are using.
All right, that poll is live. If you guys could go ahead and take a couple seconds for us to give us what your primary collaboration tool is. And you are welcome to select all that apply if you're using multiple platforms.
Yep, you can select multiples. We'll just leave it open for another 15, 20 seconds or so.
Okay. And with just over 90%, we'll give you guys about 5 more seconds to vote. And it looks like we are at 79% of you are using SharePoint, 7% Google, 71% emails and file shares, 7% Dropbox, and 29% other.
Cool. So Allison, what was the SharePoint again? Yeah, share that right quick. Let's take a look at that. All right. So that's what I expected. Email, file shares as others as well, and SharePoint as a large majority, with Google and Dropbox not very much. Cool. Perfect. All right. Let's move on. So that helps a ton and helps it frame up, and that's kind of what I suspected. But it's always good to know where you guys are coming from. So before we jump right in to the sins, which are the kind of the meat of this presentation, I've got some good news and I've got some bad news. So I'm going to share the bad news first to kind of get it out of the way. So the bad news is about 60% of your firms and your organizations and you guys that are going to do social collaboration, especially even on SharePoint, 60% of you guys are going to face failure. And that may be failure to meet expectations. It may be, hey, we got everything up and going functionally, but no one's using it. Failure can mean a lot of things. This is actually a number from AIIM that was out, I think it was 2013. Gartner and Gallup have both done polls as well that's seen it as high as 80% failure rates as well. So I'll talk a little bit more about what we're seeing and what led to the sins in just a minute. But that's the bad news. So before you jump off the webinar, hopefully we don't see any numbers go down and people kind of abandoning ship. We're going to talk about the good news. The good news is we know the reasons why, and that's we spend a ton of our time focusing on why are organizations failing, why are they struggling once they implement them with such great tools, SharePoint 2016 coming out, all these awesome tools, Office 365, you name it. Why are so many people still struggling to kind of get this right? And that's where the sins really come from. So without further ado, I'm going to jump right in and kind of talk before the sins on 2 overarching themes that I want you guys to just file away in the back of your minds as we go through these sins and kind of overarching themes that we see across most organizations. So the first truth, if you will, is that collaboration is not about SharePoint. And as you guys said, most of you guys are here for SharePoint and have SharePoint, are going to implement SharePoint. A lot of you guys probably have a combination of file shares as well. But at the end of the day, collaboration is not about SharePoint. Whenever I'm doing this live, I often tell people, hey, you're not here to learn about SharePoint. You're here to understand about collaboration and what it actually means for our organization. So at the end of the day, that's kind of the reframe that we start working with clients is it's not about the tool. The tool is just that, and we're going to talk about tools a little bit later on as one of the sins, but SharePoint's just a tool. It's just a platform to help you achieve bigger goals. So at the end of the day, we're all trying to get more engagement, more productivity, better communication across our entire organization, bring a fragmented company together and unify them. A ton of different things I could list up here, but at the end of the day, that's really what it's about. And you know, there's a lot of surveys out there that kind of talk about and research about what's actually going on. I'll leave these up here for a second for you guys to see. Most of these, if not all of them, don't talk about technology at all, right? It's not about specific tools. It's about how content is shared and how much we're interrupted and all these things we're trying to do to make it easier for us to actually collaborate and work together, right? At the end of the day, it's our people that are collaborating. It's not the tool that's collaborating. It's just giving us a platform and a channel and a mechanism to do that. So a lot of these, the stat at the very bottom there is actually one of the ones I'll mention when we talk about technology that Gallup had with 80% of social business. They throw collaboration in that as well. They'll fail due to an overemphasis actually on the technology and not doing enough of the planning. So that's what you'll see throughout. So that's the first truth that I wanted to kind of point out and kind of go through. The second one is that collaboration needs more time than you think and more attention to the things that we're going to talk about today. We see it so many times that, hey, we've got kind of a list of requirements and we've got some things, let's get started. And kind of how this plays out, I'll do a quick demonstration for you. So most projects we see people go away and they come to us and they say, hey, we went to the business, we gathered some requirements, we've got some wish list and some punch list items, we're ready to get started, we put those on a project plan, we've got our Gantt chart, it looks awesome, here's our phases, we're ready to get going. Well, oftentimes what we see, people often forget, is that a task list that might look like this with 10 tasks on it actually looks more like this, where you've actually got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of decisions, and these tasks overlap. Maybe some of them have 10 decisions that need to be made, and so on and so forth. And what we actually see, we've actually got this down to the numbers, that there's anywhere between 2 and 3 decisions for every $1,000 you spend on your social and collaboration initiative. So just quick math, if you were to spend $100,000 on your initiative in labor costs and those kind of things, you'll see anywhere from 200 to 300 individual decisions that need to be made. So not only is it just 10 to 15 tasks, now it's 200 to 300 decisions, and many of these decisions actually don't have anything to do with technology. These are decisions about, well, who's going to use it? Or was the HR use that information the same way that IT does? Do they need to get at the information differently? How do we make sure we're training people once we hire new people? I mean, all these kind of things that we're going to talk through. There's a lot of decisions. So that's one of the things, and we'll talk through some expectations as well, that we want to make sure that as you guys go about your projects and start on your projects, that if you're starting a new project, make sure you take the time to kind of go through and do some of the planning, because it will sneak up on you. And as they always say, that the devil's in the details, right? So that's the first thing. If you're in a project right now, it's never too late. We actually do CPR as one of our offerings, where we kind of turn projects around and help people kind of get back on track. So it's better late than never. There are things you can do if you're mid-project. You say, man, we haven't done any of that, and we are kind of off track. There's ways to get back on track. But if you guys are starting projects, it's a really good time to kind of go about that. So, and I've mentioned the 2 to 3 decisions per $1,000 in labor costs for that. So without further ado, let's jump into the sins, and we'll go through these and talk through each of these sins. And again, if you have questions that come up and anything, just please give those to Allison and write them there in your window, and we'll capture all those we can. So real quick, how we came up with the deadly sins. So in a nutshell, we started our organization about 13 years ago, like many organizations that were like ours. I mean, you guys, a lot of people that don't know us well think, hey, those guys are a technology consulting firm. Those guys, do technology really well. And we do the technology really well. We've got super certified people, folks that came from Microsoft. We've got very technically excellent people on our team. But what we noticed about 3-4 years ago is that a lot of our new clients coming to us were looking to revive a project that was kind of struggling. And we started seeing this pattern over and over and over. So we actually stopped and took a survey of kind of all of our projects that were going on, and looked at them and said, with our new proposals going out, what is the ratio of these? And we actually found out that about almost 60% of our new proposals going out the door were 2 organizations that were actually struggling to turn around an implementation or had tried it once or twice or more before, and were trying to do it again the second or third time. So that's kind of where the CPR and the deadly sins came from, because what we then did was we shifted our focus and said, it's not like 5 or 10% are kind of struggling. This is a large percentage of organizations that are really struggling with getting this right. Why are they doing that? So we started to peel back the layers and understand more and more and more why organizations are really struggling with the collaboration, especially on SharePoint and those tools out there. So that's where the deadly sins came from. It's a really good session for us. We like it, and it always gives you guys nuggets. One thing I'll say is I don't expect you guys to take all 7 and say, yep, we're doing all 7, or maybe we're doing a couple. What I always like to do in my presentations is give you guys hopefully a handful of nuggets that you guys can pull out of there and say, yeah, we really are doing that bad. Let's change that, or man, we really got to avoid that, because that is something we really could end up doing. So let's jump in. So the first sin is unrealistic expectations. And as we all know, in life, in business, unrealistic expectations always leads to disappointment. If you set your bar really high, you're almost always going to be let down, right? And if you have unrealistic expectations, you're almost always going to be let down. So a lot of times, our initial conversations with organizations is reframing and pointing them in the right direction and kind of setting the tone for what's to come. So just an example, I mean, we'll hear things like, man, this is going to make us so much more productive right away, or if we could get this in place by 4th quarter, man, we're going to be up and running by the 1st of the year, and we're going to be good to go. One of our favorites is, we've got super smart people, very technical. We probably only need about a half day of training, and we'll be good to go. And train the trainer, and that's all we need. And those are just a few of the expectations that we that we hear and things from users. We also hear users come back and sometimes say, hey, this way we're doing it now is so much more cumbersome. Why is it that way? Or hey, it's taking me longer to do it this way. And so a lot of people go into this thinking they're just going to take a tool like SharePoint and apply it, roll out a new intranet, whatever it may be, and immediately you get, the 250% productivity boost that you've been promised by some of this research and some of these surveys, and it just doesn't work that way. So, in general, things are going to slow down before they speed up. Anytime you do change management or a new way of doing something, yes, it probably is going to be more efficient, but it's not going to be right away if somebody's been working in an Excel spreadsheet for 10 years and they know it like the back of their hand. Doing something a little bit differently is going to take some more time. So make sure that you're always kind of understanding the expectations and going into it kind of with eyes wide open. And one of the things we've learned from an expectation standpoint, and I'll mention this a little bit later on as one of the other sins, but people support and use what they help create. So getting past expectations always helps making sure your users know what's going on, what they can expect versus rolling something out. You'll hear one of these in our case studies that I do today on a company that did not inform their users at all, and kind of what the result of that was. So making sure that people are kind of in the loop, that always goes a long way, and just making sure you kind of know what's coming and what lies ahead. The second sin is not providing immediate value. And at the end of the day, all of us and our users, I mean, it really is what's in it for me, right? It's, how's this going to make what I'm doing easier, better, more efficient, more effective, those kind of things. I mean, one of the things we always try to do with our projects is make sure that, the first phase has immediate value. The low-hanging fruit is so overused, that term, but quick wins, call it whatever you want, but basically just being able to have those things that are really easy to implement, and sometimes it goes a long way, and just having some things that get people excited. We've seen projects and people come to us where they had a nice project plan, had everything laid out, but the first 6 or 9 months was infrastructure and putting things in place and scalability and disaster recovery and all kinds of things. And the people that have been involved with the project were saying, man, we talked about this a year ago. What's going on? What's happening? So making sure that you're giving immediate value, that'll help a ton with user adoption, how things are going, and be able to get people engaged early on as well. And again, same thing, getting people involved in the process. People are going to use and people are going to support what they help create. And I can't say that enough, and you'll probably hear me say it a couple more times before the presentation's over. We say that all the time: get people involved, get people involved, get people involved. Don't do this in a vacuum. don't send it off to IT. We know and we see it that SharePoint is almost always or oftentimes owned by IT, and that's fine, but IT should partner with the business and should partner with what they need from a value standpoint to make sure that they're facilitating and adding value. The third sin is not having goals that are measurable, and we see a lot of people say, you know, we've got goals. We want give you a good example. We want an intranet, you know, built, and that's what we need. That's what we've done, and we say, you know, how do you measure that an intranet is done? Is it that you have a homepage? Is it that it's responsive and works on mobile devices? Is it just a landing page where people can get to other systems? Is it content management and document management as well? What does that actually look like? So making sure that you actually have your goals outlined, that they're specific, and that they're actually measurable. Just asking simple questions like, what does done look like? How are we going to know when we're actually at the finish line? If we don't know, you know, what it means to actually cross that line, how do we know when we're actually done? How do we know when we're done with phase one? You know, how can we check the boxes? So making sure that you actually have very clear and very concise and measurable goals. So a lot of people go into these type projects with very good intentions that we want all these things done, but making sure that, yes, when we get finished, we want to make sure that we have an internet that can be viewed on all these types of browsers and that's responsive, and that email traffic is cut down by 30%, and that we're sending links instead of attachments or whatever it is. So there's a whole bunch. You can probably Google out there. I forget who it was. Maybe it was Gallup, or one of the guys came up with a whole list of kind of some metrics around these type things that you can actually use. I would say don't try to adopt those, but adapt, you know, your own metrics to those. But come up with metrics and try to figure out, you know, what is it going to look like when we're done? What does it mean for our business when we're done? And be able to check those things off and stick to the plan. You know, stick to the plan once you get going, making sure that you have everything in place when you're going through that, and that you don't get off course as well. That's one of the most important things you guys can do. This is a biggie. So, you know, I've got a lot to say on this. I could probably spend a half hour talking about the tool first mentality, and this is one we've just seen more and more and more. I think the reason we see it more these days is just because the tools are so awesome, right? I mean, you guys know how great the tools are. You guys like the tools. Some of you on this call, on this webinar may actually not like SharePoint too much, or not like that because it's got kind of such a black eye in the organization. But we see a lot of people starting with this awesome tool that does so much, and basically taking the tool and figuring out how to use it. The best analogy I have is if a person wakes up on Saturday morning, walks to their garage and grabs a hammer, and then starts walking around their house and saying, all right, now what can I hammer today? What do I have and that needs to be hammered? And that's the way a lot of people approach the collaboration problem. They pick the tool, they pick SharePoint, they pick CRM, they pick whatever the tool may be, and they walk around and look for, well, tell us how other people are solving problems. Tell us how these are. Instead of saying, hey, I've got a leaky faucet in my kitchen, I need a wrench, I need a screwdriver, I need whatever it is, and figuring out what the right tool is. I can tell you that SharePoint's probably going to be a pretty good tool in your toolbox, right? We've got all the tools we need. We've got an awesome garage. We've got every tool that we could probably imagine out there. But first, you've got to know what you're trying to solve, what problem you're trying to solve. And each one of you guys is solving a different problem. Some of you guys are trying to solve a problem where you're very fragmented. Some of you guys are trying to solve a problem with getting everybody on the same page. Maybe it's integration of systems, dashboards, visibility, content management, whatever it is. Make sure you understand what you're trying to solve and what the problem is first, and then figuring out the tool. This is one that will get you in trouble every single time. And I'll show you a quick stat on that. So we've seen this a lot, which is why I said I could talk on it for a whole lot. This is a survey we did when we started seeing this come back a lot of time, and a lot of organizations coming back, and we started asking them, so tell us how many times you guys have implemented a collaboration tool. Maybe the first time you chose something different, and then you chose something else. So you can see the first time it's about in line with what I talked about. 40% are satisfied, about 60% failure rate on that. Well, the second time around you get a little bit of bump because you've learned a few things, but you pick another tool, but it's still not even 50% of the people that are really satisfied. And then as you get 3, 4, 5 or more times trying to implement these tools, the actual success rate goes down even further than the 40%. So what this basically tells us, and we had a perfect example, is a company started with CRM. They said, man, I think CRM was just the wrong platform we started with. Then they moved to, I think it was SharePoint after that, and then tried something else again, and basically every time they tried it, it's almost, you know, the definition of insanity. They tried it thinking they were going to get different results, just trying a new tool every single time. So keep that in mind. Just putting a new tool in place is not going to be what makes it successful. It actually can contribute to the failure, picking the tool every time. So if there's any one big one you take away, don't start with the tool. I know a lot of you guys already have the tool selected. That's fine. That's perfectly fine. But don't lead with the tool. Don't let the tool lead you in your decisions. Stop first. Understand what are you trying to build. What are my goals, and then figure out what pieces of the tool you may need to use. I'll give you a good example. We actually had a scenario where we looked at everything, understood how the users worked, who was using it, how it worked, and came to the conclusion that actually keeping it in Excel was actually better than migrating to SharePoint or whatever it was. So sometimes you're going to realize that, man, if I take the time to plan this out, SharePoint is a great tool, but it's not a silver bullet, right? It's not going to fix everything. And when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So again, you take SharePoint and try to make it that hammer that goes around just looking for everything that it can be used for. So I know I probably beat that one to death, but that's a really important one for you guys to hold on to. The fifth sin is too many rules. So I want Allison to pop up a poll here for you guys to just kind of give an example, and this is what I mean by this.
Launch.
So this is the best analogy I have, and I know it's kind of a funny thing. I don't expect you guys to vote unless your color really is blue that you like. But we see this so many times. We basically see someone go in and say, hey, you can collaborate, you've got this great platform, but you can only do it on these days, and you've got to do it in this way, and it's got to be so restrictive. So Allison, you can take that down now, but kind of just put that up there as a funny way to say, you can't have so many rules that it makes it counterproductive to collaboration, what you're trying to do, right? If I said, hey, tell me your favorite color, but all you can pick is blue, you'd look at me like I'm crazy, right? You're like, well, that's not my favorite color. Well, sorry, that's the only choice you've got. We see that more and more. So I kind of put up here rigid core, flexible edges, and this is kind of a new mantra that we're starting to talk to our organizations about. Where don't get me wrong, we understand governance. We're big proponents of governance. You want your rules of the road. You want your your guidelines and your policies. Sometimes there's things that just are non-negotiables with compliance and other things like that, especially if you're in financial services, healthcare, whatever it may be. There's all kinds of different compliance and regulatory things you have to do. That's your core. But at the edges, give people the flexibility to be able to collaborate, because everybody works a little bit differently. And one of the biggest things we're seeing today is, and you probably heard it a lot, and we spend a lot of time working with organizations on this multi-generational workforce that we've got now, right? We've got millennials in the workplace, we've got boomers in the workplace, we've got people now with the downturn, a few years ago, we've got people staying in the workforce till 65, 70, even later sometimes. And in the next 5 years, you'll have the next generation coming out in 2020. So for the first time ever, we'll have 5 generations. Well, a 23-year-old is going to work much differently than a 65-year-old. It's just a fact of it. And so not everyone in your organization, even a 30-year-old and a 50-year-old that work side by side, work very differently. There's certain ways they work. Don't make it so restrictive that they can't actually collaborate, which is what you're trying to do. You're trying to, we talked about it early on, you're not trying to solve a SharePoint problem, you're trying to bring people together to help them work together. So define your core, make sure you've got your governance in place, give them, if we use the road analogy, give them your ditches so you can stay on the road and in between, but let them change lanes, let them do the things they need to do on the edges of what needs to be done. Don't make it so restrictive where they've got to add 15 pieces of metadata and they have to check in and check out every document. The tools have matured beyond some of those things, so again, don't make it so restrictive, because what I can tell you will happen is people will find the easiest way to get their job done, right? At the end of the day, if it's so restrictive, they're going to go out and they're going to open up a OneDrive or a Dropbox or Google Drive or whatever it is, email it back and forth to themselves. They're going to do that, and they're going to find a way to make it easy to work and do their role. So try to give them a platform and lower your risk by giving them a safe place where they can actually do the collaboration that they need to do. So don't make it so restrictive that you can't get work done. The sixth sin, set it and forget it mentality. So at the end of the day, collaboration is one of those initiatives that, unlike maybe an ERP upgrade or one of these other big initiatives, a lot of people kind of put this in that same bucket. You're never done with this initiative, and collaboration and collaborative initiatives in general are kind of meant to be ongoing, and they should evolve. And so you should always kind of go back to the drawing board, pull out your blueprint, and figure out what you're trying to do. When we do roadmap planning with organizations, we look at the first 1, 2, 3 phases, whatever we need to do over the first year or two, and then we always identify future opportunities, things they can do later on, and you got to keep evolving. This is one that we see a lot of people and have so many projects going on that when they get done with the SharePoint project, they say, man, I'm so glad we're finished with that. All right, let's move on to the next project. We've got to go, and this one kind of gets put on a shelf. And as soon as you do that, it starts dying. And for SharePoint and these type of platforms, you can't have that mentality, because it's not like ERP where you need to upgrade every few years. I mean, there's going to be new things coming out. It's a platform for people to work together. What happens when new features come out? What happens when you hire new people or the next generation comes up? How are you going to change things? What happens if your company buys another company and you've got to bring those together? So there's a lot of ways. I mean, this collaboration and this SharePoint piece should be central to what you guys are doing in your organization. And so if it's central to your organization and the way it brings people together, think of it almost like a hub of bringing all these different groups together. You got to make sure you're evolving. You got to make sure you're continuing to change and to make sure you have a process in place. One of the things I tweeted about, and I should have mentioned this early on, for everybody that's in attendance here, and we'll have an attendance list at the end, we're going to email you out a link to download a SharePoint solution that will help you guys with this set it and forget it mentality user adoption. It's a site feedback solution, and you basically install it on your SharePoint, and it allows users, no matter where they are on your site, to hit a little button, submit feedback, and it goes to a list where someone can set alerts and kind of monitor and gather information from your users. So they don't have to go out and submit an email. They don't have to send something and stop what they're doing. They can click a quick button, enter in what they want to. It'll send you the website, the URL they were on, the list, the library, who they were, and their thoughts on it. So maybe they say, hey, it'd be nice if we could have another little search bar here or something like that. It's gone a long way. So we developed that about a year or two ago. And for all you guys that are in attendance, we'll send you out a link so you guys can download it and install it and try it. We've got it for SharePoint 2010 and 2013, both online and on-premise. So you guys will enjoy that. So that'll help as well. But again, you've got to have a way to collect feedback. You've got to have a way to track lessons learned, make sure you're improving, make sure you continue to go forward. And last but not least, the one thing that we see get cut, especially as a consulting firm, people want to trim budgets, is, hey, can we have just, again, like I kind of mentioned early on, can we just have a half-day training, maybe train the trainer, and we'll get through that kind of quickly. The one thing I could point out is training should not be seen as an event. It's not a singular event that takes place after deployment. And to be honest and very candid with you guys, early on, we used to think that as well, like a lot of organizations do. Hey, we get finished with the deployment, let's get everybody in a room and let's train them. And what we learned over the years from our own lessons learned and from these projects coming back and kind of understanding what's going right and what's going wrong is that what happens next year when your organization is growing and you add 100 new employees? How do you continue to train new people? What happens if someone comes over from a different role and now they got some SharePoint training, but it was as someone in HR and now they're in procurement or whatever it may be? So how do you make sure there's a process and a mechanism for making sure people continue to be trained? And then on the communication side, we just see it a lot where things go forward, everybody's gung-ho about it, but the users aren't in the loop. They don't know when things are launching, and it's amazing how much just an email, post on Yammer, whatever your collaboration and your communication tool is, how far that goes in helping with user adoption. It's amazing just when people are in the loop and people are kind of a part of the process that people will adopt something, will start to understand it. So make sure that you do put time aside and understand, and just sit down and start thinking about your training, adoption, communication plan. That's one area that people just kind of, hey, people will just get it. We got smart folks, they'll get it. I'm telling you, they'll probably get the technology, but why are they using it? Why should I do that? When should I do this versus this? All the different things that you guys know is something that a lot of people cut out, and we want to make sure that you guys don't fall into that trap as well. So those are the 7 sins that we want to go through. Now what I want to do, we've got about a half hour left. It won't take us that long to get through these. I'll talk through a few case studies that we've done of real life projects where these fell into our CPR service offering, where these folks and these organizations came to us and they had some pain going on. They had done things not right. And you'll see some of the sins throughout here as we kind of go through and talk through some of these. So this first one that I want to talk about, I call it how the West was won, right? And so it's kind of what you hear a lot of times out there with the wild, wild West, and kind of just gung-ho, people doing what they want to, no laws, no rules, anything like that. So this was a large manufacturer of hotel guest supplies, and what was interesting about this one is that on the surface it actually looked like it was a pretty good project and set up for success. So it was well planned. They had a lot of planning up front as far as requirements, the phases, what we want done, the functionality. The scope was pretty small, so we said, hey, that's a higher likelihood of success because we've got a smaller scope. It's going to be a pilot to this small group, so we're going to get that out there. So all the things look pretty good. Like, yeah, let's test the waters. Let's see if everybody's using this in the right way. Well, what happened was shortly after deployment of this to the pilot program, these guys really liked what was going on in this department. So around the water cooler or the coffee pot, they were talking, man, are you guys using SharePoint? SharePoint, what's that? I didn't know you guys were on SharePoint. Yeah, let me send you the link and we'll go to it. So you guys can kind of get what happened next. Next thing happened, wildfire spread, and the Wild Wild West was born kind of within this organization. People were creating sites everywhere. There was no permissions. It was basically open because they didn't lock it down to just this pilot group. It was like, hey, we'll send the link out to them, but who was to stop them from talking and telling other folks about it? And no one told them they couldn't do that. So people started using it, and all good things. You want people excited, you want people using it, but it started to propagate, and it got really out of control. And so they had 900, I think it was 900 sites created all over their SharePoint organization. They didn't know where the sites were. They didn't know what the content was. They didn't know if they had duplicated content. I mean, it was a real mess. And so you can imagine the mess they had when they started to search and they were getting 5 copies of something across different things. I mean, it was a mess. So the first step that we took with these guys was to basically stop and say, who is actually using this? Because we didn't even have a good handle on, or they didn't, on who was actually going in and creating these sites. So through some analytics, we could kind of understand who was using the site and what they were doing, what functionality was being used. And then one of the first things we did was put together a leadership team, and part of that was kind of a governance subcommittee. So the biggest piece missing for these guys was any kind of governance, any kind of rules. It was started small, but they didn't have any kind of framework around who could do what. Let's even just lock down the permissions. That would have stopped a lot of it. But just taking time to think through some of those things that a lot of people just kind of gloss over got them into a lot of trouble. So once we formed the governance committee, we were able to kind of turn things around, get everybody back in alignment. And actually today it's thriving, and people feel empowered and know what they're supposed to do. They know that new things are coming out, and they've got this leadership team, and that's something that we always form as part of our projects is kind of helping organizations get their leadership teams up and going as well, and trying to kind of keep those in line. So this is one where something that looked good on the surface could really turn out bad. Make sure that when you guys go live and you start early, we start from day one, to be honest, with governance. Again, gives you plenty of time, on the runway to get the governance plan up, get it built, understand who's going to be using it, what needs to go in that, and so on and so forth. The next case study I'll call Third Time's a Charm, and this is a university. It had an alumni population that was all over the world, and by the time they came to C5, they had actually gone through 2 other vendors. So we were the third vendor they had come through. So there were a number of different issues, partly planning, partly vendor issues. I could probably do a whole session on this case study alone and talk about it and all the different things in here. But basically over 2 failed implementations over a few months, this was about a 3-month project initially. By the time they came to us, we had, I think, about 6 weeks to get this launched before an alumni graduation. So this is one of those cases where it was pretty much a life or death situation. And so a lot of times I talk about kind of, a doctor on the battlefield, and that's kind of what we felt like here a lot of times. It was, we couldn't make the perfect cast and the perfect things to kind of fix this patient. We had to do some improvising on how we stopped the bleeding. So one of the things we did was we moved really quickly to prioritize needs, and that's something that we now make a part of our process, a part of our planning is prioritization of needs, because what we realized was things that they said, yeah, we've got to have those, they actually didn't, and we ended up cutting quite a bit of that out because once we got some feedback, they're like, yeah, we could probably live without that. So when push came to shove, they were able to cut some. So we try to have those tough conversations up front so that we can push pretty hard on setting those priorities and not just having everything in the kitchen sink in the first phase, so to speak. So we push really hard to kind of think through those scenarios and say, really, do you need this? What's going to happen if you don't do that? Let's play out that scenario. So cutting back on that. One of the other things we did that again is kind of like the doctor on the battlefield is we had to do some implementation changes that we wouldn't have done in a normal scenario. So had we had 2, 3, 4 months to do it, we would have built this out, very well architected. But this is one of those cases where we had to, get a couple branches and make a splint for the leg or whatever. So we basically had to do some things that we knew weren't long term, but they would get the patient to the hospital. So we ended up doing some things that we knew we would have to go back in and change later. And that's one thing I would tell you guys, if you're in a project right now, it's never too late, as I've mentioned. If you're in a project and it's not going well and you're like, man, we're just not getting adoption, should we press on and just cross our fingers and hope that it gets better, or should we stop and take stock of everything? I would say stop, figure it out, figure out where you are, and maybe you have to make some tough calls, but it'll be much better off if you stop now, understand where you are, where you have to go, than just plow through and kind of cross your fingers and wish for the best. So make sure that it's going to be some hard decisions if you're in that. That's why we try to spend a lot of time up front so that people don't have to get themselves in a situation where it's really tough and they've got this battlefield mentality. We want to make sure that people are spending the time up front, make your project go a lot smoother, and just spend that time up front. And I'll talk about that a little later on when this all comes together toward the end as we wrap up. The last one is the forgotten ones, and Allison was laughing at my slide here. She said it was very, very depressing, but it really is. I mean, this one is the case that I was telling you guys about, and probably one of the worst situations we've ever seen, where you had this was a large manufacturing global deployment of SharePoint in many countries, but it was mainly used for document management. So what the organization did was they had a couple folks in IT. It was owned by IT, no problem with that. But a couple folks in IT said, man, we've been here a long time. We know we've been here longer than most of the employees because it's a pretty fast growing, a lot of new employees. We know exactly how they're going to work and how these different departments function together. Let's get SharePoint up and going. We'll build something out. We'll roll it out to the users, and they're going to love it. I mean, who doesn't love SharePoint? Who doesn't love their things up there? So, long story short, they basically went through in this vacuum of we know how to build it out. Didn't get anyone else involved. Didn't talk to the users. Didn't talk to anyone else. And basically went on a Friday over the weekend and migrated all the file shares to SharePoint over the weekend. And so employees come in on Monday morning, go to hit their S drive or whatever it is, and lo and behold, hey, S drive isn't there anymore. We've got SharePoint now. And some people were literally saying, well, what's SharePoint? They didn't even know what SharePoint was, and yet IT had migrated all these people's file share over to SharePoint. Some of you guys are probably shaking your head, and trust us, we were as well. But it's one of those cases where, no training, no information, no communication. I mean, there were, gosh, this one could be a number of webinars on this case study alone. But basically, how we just cut out the users, and again, who's going to support and use something that they had no role in helping create, right? And it wasn't even for them. It was basically someone else deciding what they needed best, and that never works. I mean, that's anti-collaboration, right? So you guys have to make sure that you're getting user input. So the biggest thing we did with these guys was step back, cut out functionality that really wasn't needed. Again, we go back to that where they had everything. They wanted to do document management, but they had ratings and social and my sites and everything else turned on, just things that were confusing a lot of people that didn't need to be there. So we trimmed back everything, turned off all the bells and whistles, made sure we got it down to the basics, and then just did a series of boot camps, some webinars, and it's amazing how far just education and showing people what they need to do, how far that goes. And again, if you do that up front, you're going to have a lot happier people. You're not going to have a black eye. And it took a while because people hated SharePoint. So you can imagine when we tried to do the turnaround, I mean, people didn't want to hear anything about it. They were like, we don't like SharePoint. And they didn't like it because they didn't know what it was supposed to do, who was supposed to do it. If they would have known up front, it would have been a lot different story. So it's amazing how, a couple of different, decisions can change your destiny pretty dramatically. So this is one where, again, make sure that you get the people involved, make sure that you get users involved, make sure you know what the users value. I wrote a blog gosh, it's been over a month now, but you can find it on our website, c5insight.com. But it basically talks about value versus ROI, and that's one of the big pieces, and I'll kind of close out this case study with that is, a lot of people talk about ROI. We've got to have ROI, and I agree, you've got to have some return on your investment. But when you lead with ROI, a lot of times you forget about the people actually using it. And I always use the kind of analogy of, if you spend, a couple $100,000 on a huge implementation, it all looks great on paper, it looks like we're going to save money, we're going to cut out a lot of outdated content, we're going to make it more efficient, but no one goes there and no one uses it, I can tell you your ROI is zero every single time. So no matter what your system looks like, if no one's using it and people don't understand how to use it and they're not getting the benefit out of it, you'll never have an ROI. So first and foremost, make sure you're focusing on the business value, what users need to get their jobs done, and we kind of call it organic ROI. It'll come naturally. You want to measure that, but it's never going to come if you don't have any business value in there. So how do we sum all this up? So I'll do a quick recap of the 7 sins, and then we'll talk through this as we wind up over the next 15 minutes or so. So these are the 7 sins we talked through, and you guys can see them there on your screen. So what was interesting is we started looking at these sins and started looking at what all these different projects had in common and trying to come up with 7. And maybe I'll do something like Covey did. We'll come up with the 8th habit or the 8th sin. And there's plenty more things that we see, but these are kind of some of the core that I wanted to get to everyone. What we started to see was they fell into 2 camps, and it was really interesting to us to see this play out. And ultimately what happened was everything fell into these 2 areas, planning and control. And it had nothing to do with the execution, the implementation, we picked the wrong tool, those kind of things. And you can see how these kind of break up. I mean, basically, if you spend some time understanding expectations, communicating, planning the project, what are our goals? Are we providing value? Are we choosing a tool first versus control? Are we restrictive? Are we just, deploying this and then forgetting about it? Do we are we having communication and training throughout the project and making sure we're running the project and have processes in place? It was interesting to see how this shaped up. So then we took this a step further and we said, well, if this is all in planning and control, let's look at the projects that haven't gone well and the clients that are coming back to us, that 60%, and let's see how they spent their time on the project to see if there's any correlation. And lo and behold, what we saw was pretty much conventional wisdom, which you see a lot of times. Basically, we know we have to do some planning up front. We spend about 25% of our time on planning. We're going to put some requirements together. We got a project plan. We're going to control it. We've got a process, and we've got a PM that's going to run the project. So we know we have to spend time, but we got to hit the ground running and build all this functionality, make sure it's all working, make sure we've got all the security and permissions, and there was a ton of focus put on the technology implementation. Well, what we did was we took this and said, well, if everything's in planning and control, are we spending enough time in those areas? And so we shifted our projects to what we call the 40-20-40 principle, and this is where we sit today, and projects are a lot more successful, because at the end of the day, if you can get the planning right, spend a lot of time, if you can get the control right, make sure you're managing the project, make sure you're managing expectations. The technology part, honestly, is the easy part, right? It's hey, we've got our blueprint, now go build the house. And the building the house, you see these houses go up in a matter of weeks and a month sometimes. The planning, the architecture, the figuring out where to build it, clearing the land, all the preparation that goes for building a house, that's where all of your time is spent, right? So making sure that you guys just take, I think this is a really good principle to take away. And again, it's not going to be 40-20-40 for every single organization. I mean, to take it with a grain of salt. And we always say adapt, don't adopt, right? So don't adopt exactly this methodology, but adapt it to what you guys are. Maybe it's a little bit less, maybe it's a little bit more. But if you can just kind of do a test within your organization, are we spending the appropriate time on planning and control and not spending so much time on the technology piece? If we can get these pieces right, the technology will work out right? We're gonna spend the time because we know what we're building, right? We know what we're doing, we know what we're building. So this is one that I'd like to leave you guys with. And as we kind of close it out, we'll have plenty of time for questions as well. I wanted to end. You may have seen me tweet on this as well, but I wanted to end with a quick story that kind of sums up everything and kind of talks about, what can World War II bombers teach us about success and how we approach this. So during World War II, it was interesting. The Allied bombers, they were facing a lot of losses. So the British Air Ministry basically undertook this analysis and got all their engineers together to try to figure out why we're losing so many bombers. It was crazy. So they got every engineer together. They set out, they looked at every single bomber coming back. They could, figured out where all the bullet holes were going. And ultimately, after analyzing all the result of all the planes that were coming back and figuring out where all the bullet holes were going and everything, they decided to put extra plating on these areas and reinforce them where all the bullet holes were going. Well, went out, and guess what? It didn't work. Still had just as many, if not more, bomber losses. So they came back to it and said, "What in the world? I mean, we're just dumbfounded. Why is that not working? Maybe the plating made the planes too heavy, and that made them hard to maneuver and handle, and so that was offsetting the armor plating." Well, long story short, what ultimately happened was the British Air Ministry brought in a mathematician of all people to try to solve this problem. And there's actually a statistical kind of analysis and bias out there now for I think it's called the survivorship bias. But basically, what the mathematician realized was you can't put the extra armor where the bullet holes are, because what you're evaluating is all the planes that were actually coming back, right? So they were looking at all the planes that made it back, and if the planes were making it back with bullet holes, then obviously they can get shot in those areas and not be a casualty, right? So he said, what if we put all the armor where we don't see bullet holes, because that's probably where they're being shot down and not making it back to us. And so that was kind of the light bulb moment where they were focusing on the wrong thing, and after that, bombers, were coming back. They weren't having as many losses, and they were focusing on the right thing. So it took a mathematician to kind of figure out and kind of solve this, and the engineers could not figure that out. So the lesson is basically, anytime you examine just your successes and what you're doing right, you're going to skew the results. And that's what we spend a lot of time trying to focus on, is making sure that we look at these failures. And that's what you guys are getting the benefit of now, is some of these organizations that have gone through this pain, and a lot are still going through there. I mean, this is one of our most popular sessions, and one I give all over the country, every few months. And people just want to hear about it because people are still struggling with these same things. So the more we can get this out there, the more it is. We want people to understand that. Focus on kind of where things are going wrong. Make sure you're not just focusing on the successes. Make sure you're looking at the failures as well. So a couple takeaways from here. Don't assume that something's happening. Make sure you're collecting all the information within your organization. Make sure you understand where the problem really lies. And don't collect partial data, right? So from the example of the bombers, make sure you collect data about the entire problem, what's going on, what's happening, who's happy, who's not happy. The site feedback web part we give helps people kind of bridge that gap a little bit and get feedback from people, even if they don't want to hear it sometimes. And then lastly, once you solve the problem, follow up on it. I can't emphasize that enough. Follow up to make sure you actually solve the problem. Once you put a solution out there, do lessons learned, follow up, make sure that you're actually solving the problem that you set out to solve, and that it's actually solved. So that's kind of what bombers can teach us about collaboration success. I want to end, and then we'll open it up for questions if there are any at the end, and if not, then we'll end a few minutes early. But one of my favorite quotes, I tweeted this earlier this week. Love this quote by Einstein, and it really goes back to what we're all about. We can't keep approaching the same problems the same way every single time. We've got to think differently about them. We've got to go about them and say, if we've got all this new technology and we're still getting the same results, there's got to be something else going on. And that's kind of what we've tried to do here. Tried to lay some things out for you guys. And I think if you guys can take away all of these, or even just a few of these sins, and apply them, maybe the 40-20-40, I think you guys will be much better off, and I know you'll have a lot better chance of success. So with that, what I want to do is kind of share a few upcoming webinars we have, and then we'll wrap it up with kind of how you can get in touch with us and how you can reach out and get more information. We've got a lot of stuff going on the webinars. We've got a few here, one on Dynamics CRM and one on Salesforce. So if you guys are using or have anybody on your sales team want to pass these along, you guys can write down, take a screenshot of this if you want to. For these links, they are case sensitive, by the way, the links that you go to there with the webinar number on them. And then the last one on June 23rd is why upgrade from 2010. And we've got a lot of folks, got a prospect I'm talking to now that's actually in 2007. So a lot of people are actually still on 2007. A lot of people on 2010. We were at Ignite a couple weeks ago, and 16's been pushed out, as you know, 2016. So at this point, most people shouldn't wait on 2016. If you're going to a new version or starting a SharePoint product, you should just go to 2013 because it's going to be a year at least before 2016 is ready for you to use, and that'll be when it's just released, and you may want to wait a while. So this is going to be a good webinar on why upgrading and why you should upgrade, some of the things you should think about, not only from technical but from a business standpoint and what it looks like as well. So with that, I'll open it up for questions. Here's some information that you can get in touch with us. We've got a very active blog out there. If you go to c5insight.com, there's a blogs link at the top. Very active, a few blogs a week even. Many a month on technical, business, a lot of different issues out there. I've got a blog out there on the 40-20-40 principle. And then if you guys want to follow us on social, you'll find out about our events. You'll find out about all kinds of things that we've got going on there. So definitely would love for you guys to get in touch with us. If this is something you guys are facing and you want to talk to us more about, hey, we've got a project getting ready to start, and can you guys help us with the planning? Sometimes we help organizations just with the planning and the control part, or even sometimes just the planning and setting themselves up for success in the blueprint, and then they handle the implementation maybe themselves. But again, that's one of the most important parts of it, so we're happy to help you guys if you want to reach out to myself. You saw my email there at the beginning. If you send it to luck@C5Insight, Allison will get that as well. So definitely reach out to us. We've got all your information from the session as well, and that's what I have. So we've got about 8 minutes left. Perfect timing. Allison, do we have any questions?
No questions so far, so
good.
Please feel free to go ahead and type a question to us. You'll see the column in the right hand of your screen, and we will read the question out loud and share that back with everybody in case anybody's questions overlap. Curtis and I will hang out here for a couple more minutes if you're getting your questions together. But otherwise, to echo that, we will share both the link and the SharePoint feedback solution that Curtis mentioned earlier on this call. And we'd love for you guys to interact with us on social media on your platform of choice.
Yep. So we appreciate it. Thank you guys, everybody, for attending today. We had pretty good attendance, and I hope it was beneficial. I hope it was worth your time this afternoon. Thanks, everyone.